Good afternoon. It's November 2nd, and Rabbi Ike's Real Jewish Classics, Hester Street. And Rabbi, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. And from this discussion I was hearing as I came in about sound and things like that, I gather that you actually got it and were able to see it. So that's good. Last week, of course, we saw a later movie by the same director, Joan Micklin Silver. And as I mentioned, she's a real innovator in terms of women directors. So very important to see this. And I just love that she has a movie called Hester Street and another called Crossing Delancey. You know, they're just so close together in the Lower East Side of New York. And of course, one is contemporary, what we saw last week, Crossing Delancey, contemporary to the time it was made in the 1980s. And Hester Street in 1975 was a look back to the turn of the 20th century, right? And a recreation of the Lower East Side. This was her first full-length movie as a director. She wrote it as well as directed it. It's adapted from a book which would have been written contemporary to the times that it's set in by Abraham Kahan. You may know his name. I mean, he's, I believe, the founder and the founding editor of the Jewish Daily Forward, which was a Yiddish language newspaper. The Vorwärts. That's the Yiddish for forward, right? So, and the Forward building still stands on the Lower East Side. It's no longer, the newspaper still exists. It's no longer a daily, it's a weekly, and it mostly exists online, I think, at this point. And it switched from being in Yiddish to English not that many years ago, actually. But the Forward building is still there on the Lower East Side. It's been turned into $1 million condominiums. It's one of my favorite things about a walking tour of the Lower East Side is they kept all of the, it still says Vorwärts in Yiddish at the top of the building. It has these relief sculptures of Marx and Engels on it. It was a liberal, a very liberal newspaper, which means that people every day go into their $1 million condos underneath the faces of Marx and Engels, the writers of the Communist Manifesto. So, it's an amazing building. It's still one of the tallest buildings in the Lower East Side. Certainly not one of the tallest buildings in New York, but in that particular neighborhood, there aren't many tall buildings. So Abraham Kahan wrote his first book called Yekel, which of course is the name of the male character in this movie who becomes Jake. That book maybe spends a little more time on Jake than the movie does. I mean, and I think this is a Joan Micklin Silver thing, right? Her movie is really much more about the women, right, than the men. So so that says something about her and her intentions, and in some ways it says something about the struggle of being a female director in a man's world, right? So she brings something very special to this, I think, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Rabbi,
Susan has a.
Can I just very quickly, I just wanted, when you were talking about the Forward, the Yiddish newspaper, I just want to quickly tell you that there was a very in-depth story in the Forward many years ago about my family.
Oh.
And about my great-grandfather, who was a cantor in Lithuania, and my great aunt. It's very interesting, and it's all in Yiddish, and I had to take it. Many years ago, I had to take it to my rabbi to get it translated for me.
Okay, yeah.
And I have this whole story, and maybe I'll give you a copy of it so that you can see it. But anyway, sorry to take you off
No,
the subject, but I just, when you were
so-
talking about the forward.
And the forward still exists. And if you're interested in reading a good liberal newspaper weekly, I recommend it highly. They write a lot of wonderful things, and it still has this strong sort of socialist, liberal, Jewish philosophy. So, which was a big part of its intention when it started. So recognize the time period that this movie is set in. The Lower East Side in New York was not only Jewish, but there was a huge Jewish presence there. It was the most densely populated place on earth at the time, more than any third world nation. So I think some of what we call the third world today is probably more densely populated, maybe someplace like neighborhoods in Delhi or someplace. But at the time, it was the most densely populated place on earth. Okay, it's the movie. I think in some ways, you guys were talking about the sound quality. This is not because the movie's old necessarily, but because it probably hasn't been cared for the way it should be, even though it's in, I think it's in American Film Institute's 100 important films of the 20th century. But it may not have been cared for as well as some movies have been. It also probably was not recorded as well to start with, and no one has spent the money to sort of digitally upgrade the sound, right? This is definitely a low budget production. And there are things that Joan Micklin Silver learned on the job, I think, as she was directing this movie. If I were to point to one, I'd say lighting, right? She didn't really know anything about movie lighting, right? If you think about this in the movies, right, there are two light sources. There's the light that's used for the camera to be able to record the image, and there's the light that's supposed to be there in the scene, right? And those are two different things. So there's a scene you may or may not remember in this movie where Gittel lights a lamp in the tenement apartment, right? And nothing changes. It doesn't get any brighter or any darker in the apartment because she lit a lamp, right? The room is perfectly lit for the camera, to be able to catch the image of her lighting the lamp, right? But the lamp doesn't provide any light in itself, and the room does not appear to be dark until the light is lit, right? So these are the sorts of things that director making her first movie that's low budget probably didn't know. She didn't know how to do that, right? By the time of a movie like Crossing Delancey, she's had some experience. She has a bigger budget. She has a better crew. She has a lighting designer, right? So while I'm not sure that lighting was ever the joy of her life and important to Joan Micklin Silver, you can see in this movie the sort of the beginnings of her as a director, right? And that's a good example of, and the sound quality and those things are all related to that. Not having the high quality equipment, high quality professionals that do this. That said, she put together an amazing cast of people, some of whom are instantly recognizable to you. Some of whom probably not so much, but are quite good and effective in their roles. I'll mention the guys first. The actor who plays Bernstein only appears in a couple of things in his life, but he does. I think he was a New York stage actor. His name is Mel Howard. He was born in Brooklyn in a Jewish family. There's not much else on his film resume. Everybody appears in CSI, stuff like that. So, he's been in some things like that. But are you looking him up, Mel Bernstein? So you see, this is what comes up is Hester Street, right? But he did have a career on the stage in New York and mostly off Broadway things. The other, and the one who plays Jekyll, Jake, is an actor named Stephen Keats. Sadly, most of the people in this movie have passed away, I think, actually.
Well, Carol Kane is alive.
Carol Kane is pretty much, Carol Kane and Doris Roberts, I think they're it,
Oh,
Mel Howard died in 1996. Stephen Keats actually died by suicide in 1994.
yeah.
So he was born in the Bronx in a Jewish family. He is in a lot of movies, and was a good character actor who, it's funny, I mean, all these other people are appearing. When you look up his name, it's because he plays a part in movies. I mean, he had a regular part in Kojak. I think I saw Telly Savalas as you were flipping through there. He appears in The Friends of Eddie Coyle, a movie with Robert Mitchum is there. He's in Death Wish with Charles Bronson. So all of those things are on there. He was a good character actor. He's, I think, effective in this role and as Jake. And, he played a lot of parts, a lot of TV shows, but I think never had the success that he hoped for and died by his own hand in 1994.
Doris Roberts also died.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
Oh,
in 2016.
Wow, I missed that. But this is the second movie we've seen her in, actually. Do you remember? We saw her in No Way to Treat a Lady. She plays the sister of an intended victim, right, in that movie.
Yeah.
So if you watch that one with us, then you've seen her in that. And of course, most people know her from the TV series Everybody Loves Raymond. In this movie, she plays Mrs. Kowarski, right? Who helps Gittel in a number of ways through the movie. We mentioned that Claudia Silver was in the movie that we saw last week as one of Amy Irving's friends in the movie, and Claudia Silver is the daughter of Joan Micklin Silver. She plays the little girl in one of the first scenes in the movie this week. Dory Kavanaugh plays the other woman, right? The one in the dance who wants to run the dance studio and things like that. She's better known as an opera singer than she is as a movie actress, and unfortunately also died young from cancer. Born in 1945, she died in 1983. So only 7 or 8 years after this movie. But she appeared in American opera companies and all over Europe in opera. So no opportunity to do that here in this movie. Yeah. And so this is one of her, few movie roles, and, does a very credible job, I think, here. And then, of course, Gittel, played by Carol Kane. This is not Carol Kane's first movie, Hester Street, but it's certainly her breakthrough performance. There wasn't a whole lot in the movies before that. She was actually born in 1952 in Cleveland in a Jewish family. She made her movie debut in 1972 in a movie that I can't recommend called Wedding in White, which was a Canadian film production. But in 1975, she appears in Hester Street. She's nominated for the Oscar for this movie, so it's really, like I said, not her debut, but certainly makes her a star. In some ways, she's always been a character actress, not often the leading lady. She won 2 Emmys for the part she plays in Taxi, if you remember that TV series where she plays Simca Doblitz, an immigrant with an accent, crazy accent, married to the character that Andy Kaufman plays in that movie, Latka Gravis. And she actually won 2 Emmys for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy for that. So she also has a lovely short part in The Princess Bride that people probably remember. She's got a small part in Woody Allen's Annie Hall. She's been in a lot of things. She's got a part in Dog Day Afternoon, if you remember that. And she plays, I think she plays the grandmother in the Addams Family movies, right? So, so a varied career, mostly comedy, but here you see she's got the chops to play drama as well, and does from time to time. More recently, she was in the TV series on streaming. I think that may have been Netflix, the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. She, I think, is the landlady in that TV series. So anyway, one other actor I'll mention, he plays a rabbi in almost everything he's in, but we'll see him again next week in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. But an actor, V. Schooler, who plays the rabbi in this movie, in the divorce scene. We've already seen him in Fiddler on the Roof and The Chosen, right? I think he might have had a small part in the one we watched in the last series, The Frisco Kid, right? So so he's got a career, he also, he's got a small part in No Way to Treat a Lady also. That's the color picture on the upper right of your screen, right there. He lives in the same boarding house with one of the victims, right? And No Way to Treat a Lady. So, but he's cast primarily as a rabbi. We'll see him again, as I think I mentioned already, in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. But he plays the rabbi in Fiddler on the Roof, and he's probably, when all said and done, when we look back on the movies we've seen, the movies we're going to see, Zvi Schooler is probably in more of them than anybody, playing essentially the same part in almost all of them, right? But it's just interesting. Actually, in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, you'll see he has a larger role than he has here. So, but I can't resist pointing him out to you here. He's the rabbi in the divorce scene, right? So, we mentioned that that Joan Micklin Silver is a real groundbreaker. I was just watching just last night. I watched a documentary about the producer Carl Laemmle, who got his start in silent films. And Carl Laemmle had 11 women directors on his staff during the silent era. So there were a lot of women directing movies during World War I. And then with the advent of sound, and of course, when men came back from war, they stopped. They stopped in most of those movies, most of those old one-reeler movies that these women directors would have made are lost. There aren't that many films from that era that still exist altogether.
Is this them?
If you get a chance to see that documentary, it's on I saw it on Turner Classic Movies. It was on this week in part because Carl Laemmle founded Universal Pictures and made the great Universal horror movies. So prior to Halloween, they were showing Frankenstein and Dracula and those movies. He produced them. But the really interesting thing is he saved hundreds of Jews from Nazi Germany. A remarkable story of his story. And I think when Eugene talks, not this, is that this Sunday? Next Sunday.
I was going to say in 2 weeks, if you want to hear more about Hollywood Goes to War, tune in on Sunday, November 14th at 10 a.m.
Right. I'm sure he'll talk about Carl Laemmle as one of the good guys who divested his studio from Nazi Germany when nobody else did, and worked to get Jews out until the day of his death. Actually, he died in his 70s, I think, still during World War II. So anyway, back to this movie. But So there were women directors way back when, but Joan Micklin Silver is one of the few in the modern era, in the talking era of movies. So the movie begins with the Dancing Academy. Right? You may have noticed on the wall it says "No Yiddish spoken here," right? So it gives us an early. Of course, they all do speak Yiddish there, but it gives us a sense of the milieu in a very powerful way, right? How do Jewish immigrants become American, right? They stop speaking Yiddish. They start speaking English. They go to dance classes where they learn how men and women can dance together, right? And the group that we see there in this very first scene, they're already so American, right, that they can make fun of a new immigrant, right? They make fun of his hat and the way, how scared he is and all of those things, right? They're very quick to judge. Yeah. Shlomi Kaminsky, right, coming in to America just off the boat, trying to find his cousin, and you see how American they have become in some ways, and how much they are not American yet, right? In the same scene, I think very well done in terms of setting that up. They would like to think they are more American than they are. They're only American when they're compared to Shlomi Kaminsky, right? They make fun that he can't drink tea without his hat, right? Because because he's still a part of the traditional Jewish milieu that he came from. That he can't eat anything without his head covered, right? So there's a lot of detail in terms of the Jewish life, the immigrant life here in the movie. I think that one of the things that when you ask the question, how could this movie possibly play outside of the Jewish community, right? It made some money. I mean, it was not Jaws, which came out the next year, I think directed by Steven Spielberg, but it actually did make a return on its investment. I think I talked about it with Crossing Delancey last week. The market was the same market in a sense that Woody Allen movies could have. Now, this is before Woody Allen's big breakthrough with Annie Hall, in a sense. So before Annie Hall, the expectation was, well, yeah, we'll make something on this investment, right? When Woody Allen was making movies like Take the Money and Run and stuff like that. So it did make some money, but it is hard to imagine what whether those who are not who don't know more about the Jewish community, what they get and what they miss in this movie, right? I imagine the divorce scene is lost on a lot of people, maybe even some folks here. But it's she does a great job, I think, as a director of kind of recreating that scene, and all through, with very little money, making we talked about how in Crossing Delancey, she essentially just had to turn the cameras on the Lower East Side. It's set contemporaneously. There were still a few blocks of the Lower East Side in the 1980s that were completely Jewish, where if you just walked down the street, all you would see were signs in Yiddish and, with English translation and things like that. Now there's most of that is gone from the Lower East Side, to tell you the truth. Partly it's the expansion of Chinatown into what was the Jewish neighborhoods, and partly it's the gentrification of the Lower East Side, so that now there are a lot more trendy coffee places and restaurants than there are, pickle men. Yeah, Mary, I see you waving, and Linda, you're waving too. So
okay. Yeah. So after I watched the movie, there was a YouTube interview between for an audience between Silver and Kane, and about making the movie. So there were a couple of things. One is that they couldn't do it on
Hester Street because it had already changed into something else. There were like a little taco Mexican or whatever the neighborhood was. It wasn't. So they did it on Morgan Street or whatever. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting was that, oh, there are two things. One, how tight the money was, that they used one horse in the movie and they just kept changing his color. They kept dyeing him. They use one cart and one horse. They send him up the street as a white horse and then back as a brown horse, which was amazing to me. And the third thing is that Kane and Silver had a relationship they didn't even know. Silver saw her in a play in Canada and brought her in for an interview and was excited because she lived in New York so she could get to her to audition for the part. And after she got the part, they discovered they had a mutual connection. They both grew up in the same community, or the Cleveland thing.
Right.
Her husband, Silver's husband, was a rabbi, and Kane's father built a whole addition, he was an architect, to the temple, and we're temple members there.
Okay.
So
Right.
it was a fascinating 30-40-minute interview on YouTube between it, and it was totally about the movie.
Great.
What they
And
were
was
trying
it,
to do.
it was at the time or?
Yes, it was when,
wow.
yes, a little
Great.
bit, yes,
I'll-
yeah.
I'll
No,
have
it
to
wasn't, a
find
little
that.
bit after, but, you know, she talked about the funding and I think it was the character of Jake. They had somebody else in mind and he decided to quit at the last minute after they invested all this money and they took Yiddish lessons. They all went to learn Yiddish to do this. And they had no money. So he was a stagehand who said, I know Yiddish because I grew up in Brooklyn or wherever. I think it was Jake. Anyway, so that was fascinating. So they said, okay, you can have the part. You don't have any money.
Yeah. It's the money side of this, right? There was a privately financed. There was no studio that wanted to finance this. Her father-in-law, Joan Micklin Silver's father-in-law, was the rabbi, Abba Hillel Silver. You know, so connections that he had in the Cleveland Jewish community that his son, her husband, had developed in the Cleveland Jewish community. A lot of them were involved in that. If memory serves, she was not, Joan Micklin Silver was not born in Cleveland. She was born in, is it Omaha? I think so. So I'm pretty sure I had that in my notes for crossing Delancey. Omaha, Nebraska. Right, her father was in lumber in Omaha, actually, but so Micklin Lumber, which I think still exists actually, but then when her husband was from Cleveland and they lived in Cleveland until she moved to New York in the late 50s. She did go to school in New York, I think at Sarah Lawrence, if memory serves. Right? So, but yeah, so they had connections. Carol Kane is from Cleveland as well, from the Jewish community. Her father-in-law, Abba Hillel Silver, is one of the most famous rabbis of the 20th century. He was a Reform rabbi at the Temple in Cleveland, and one of the early Zionists among Reform rabbis, actually. So had a lot of responsibility for changing the attitude of the Reform movement towards the land of Israel, was known as a gifted speaker, went around the country, had a national following for his speaking. So the folks who did invest probably were interested in this being an authentic Jewish movie, right? I mean, that's so not surprising that people took Yiddish lessons of it. It's one of the
Linda has her hand
movies
up.
over the years. We said, wow, where'd they get that pronunciation of Hebrew from? You know, it's not that, you know, they don't sound like they've ever said those words before. Even in movies like The Chosen, I'm not so sure they did. But that's one of the best, you know. Linda's had her hand up for a while. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that I didn't get my hand up when you brought up about a divorce, a Jewish divorce. I did get a get. So I'm one of the few people that you'd meet that got one. This is back in the late 70s, early 80s that I received it from my first husband. And it was very realistic. That's what went on. And what really I found very striking, because I felt it was too, the rabbis told me at the end that I could not get married for 91 days. I had to make sure I wasn't pregnant with
Right,
my ex-husband or my future ex-husband's child, and he could get married the same day if he wanted to. And it was very, very realistic how they write it out, and then he had to drop it into my hands.
Yes.
So I want to tell you that it was a very realistic movie. And when it came to that,
the movie cheats a little bit on some things there, but by and large, it's very realistic. It has to be folded a certain way. It has to be written a certain way. They're very there's very specific rules about the get, and there's a variety of conjecture about this. Why is it so particular about these details? One explanation is that they want to make sure that everybody's head is cool when they do this. That a man doesn't just get angry and write his wife a bill of divorcement, and write a get. So it's got to go through this careful process, which involves writing the specific words in the specific way, folding the get in a particular way, delivering it to the ex-wife in a particular way. All of those things have to be done exactly according to Jewish law, or it doesn't count. Okay.
and I had to go in front of the board, the rabbinical board that was located on Peterson Avenue at the time.
Right.
And my rabbi at the time was there with me because he had to force my ex-husband into doing this. He didn't want to give me a get. And there was a lot of animosity at our divorce. But I don't believe ours was folded. I think it was rolled. I believe it was rolled, and he had to drop it into my hand a certain way. And he didn't drop it, he threw it at me. So that's just what happened.
There's a ton of, there's a whole tractate of the Talmud, which is devoted to the get, how it's to be written, how it's to be delivered, what actually constitutes delivery, delivery in front of witnesses. So you can't just throw it over the garden hedge, right? So in a sense, you can't just throw it at your ex-wife. You have to, so what he actually did in that moment, and I wasn't there, right? But the rabbis witnessed it, and all those kinds of things. So it's the system in Orthodox Judaism is fraught with difficulty, which is one reason why the Reform movement in the 19th century decided that a civil divorce was enough from a Reform Jewish perspective, which doesn't mean that I haven't over the years worked with many people who have wanted the official document, either from a spiritual point of view, that if a marriage begins with a Jewish ceremony, it should end with one. So some people have that kind of sensibility. Others for emotional reasons needed, and others because they've gotten involved with somebody who comes from a more traditional background and wouldn't consider a relationship with them without a get. So, but the system as it stands, which is that a woman can't be divorced against her will, but a woman can't initiate a divorce in Orthodox Jewish tradition, right? Only the man gets to write the get to end the marriage. So, so you can see how that's fraught with difficulty. And in this movie, the scenario is that the husband wants to give her the get just as much or more than she wants to get it at this point, right? So, which is why she's able to come out ahead financially on this. It was far more common, and still is common in the Orthodox Jewish world, that the husband will hold the wife's family for ransom, right? He'll only give the get if paid to give the get, right? So, so this is a tremendous difficulty with the Jewish law as it comes down to us. The conservative movement in Judaism about 20, 30 years ago created their answer to this. It's called the Lieberman Clause, because Mrs. Lieberman brought the case in a New York court of law. And now in the conservative ketubah, when you get married, a Lieberman clause is inserted in every ketubah, which says, if this marriage ends in civil divorce, the husband agrees to give his wife a get, right? So, and that's enforceable in an American court of law. So when I was living in Los Angeles, near a Jewish area, the Fairfax district, it was not uncommon to see signs in shop windows that said, do not do business with so-and-so. He refuses to give his wife a get. And the Orthodox Jewish community was trying to sanction somebody and force him to do something that he was essentially extorting his ex's family for. So so this is why the reform movement sees it as a possible ritual item if people are interested, as a therapeutic tool if people want it, but not a requirement for remarriage in the Reform tradition. So that's a lot on one scene in this movie, but it is a pivotal and important scene, and I think it is very certainly accurate for its time, and I think still relatively accurate. The room may be a little bigger and a little cleaner at the CRC on Peterson, but other than that, and maybe it's not the rabbi's wife who makes sure you have the money to pay the rabbi, right? It may be a little more systematic in the modern day with the CRC in Chicago, but it's not that different either. It's got more, as Linda says, it's got more in common than different, I'd say, right? So I see Sandy's got a hand up.
Sandy.
Yeah.
Hi. I loved the movie, everything about it. The ending made me joyful for the whole evening. I was so proud of her at the end, the wife. But I did want to say my experience in Israel was everybody that did get a get, they had to pay off the Orthodox rabbis, and they had to pay thousands of dollars before they would agree to a get. So I knew personally, of people who had applied for that and what they went through.
So yeah, and that's partly a different problem, right? I mean, we have the problem of recalcitrant husbands who won't give their wife a get until they're paid enough by the wife's family. In Israel, you have the problem of the Rabbanut, the Orthodox rabbinic authority, which has power that's been vested in it by the state itself, that they can charge whatever they want for a wedding, a conversion, right? I mean, it is the way that, the rabbis supplement their income. Of course, they're paid by the state of Israel a salary, those rabbis, but they're also, they're getting income on the side from these things, essentially. So, so it's one of the problems of the Rabbanut, and of course, one of the reasons they don't want to recognize reform marriages and reform rabbis and this stuff as we're cutting in on their piece of the action, So the same thing applies in the laws of kashrut, right? And how you get to be certified kosher as a restaurant, whether in Israel or in America, for that matter, right? A lot of getting certified is paying the fee, So. So I think I'm glad you liked the movie and the ending. I think it's great, isn't it? It's So who's the real American in this movie by the time this movie's over, right? You have she's become American enough that when they say her son's name is Yosela, she says he's Joey, right? So so she's become American enough to do that, and she's become the entrepreneur, right? Who's going to make it, right? If you were going to say afterwards, the chances that she makes it, with a grocery store, right? I mean, how many of our own relatives are, can trace their lives to a trajectory like that, right? So that's great. And on the other hand, what happens to her husband? He gets the girl of his dreams, right? but it turns out she's going to make him save every nickel, and they're going to be successful too. But, you know, no more streetcar, you know, no more taxis, right? No more spending how he wants. You know, they're going to put their nickels together until they can go on. Yeah, Sue, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, there was one thing about it that puzzled me, and that is he had been in the country, I believe, for 5 years. I think that's what they said it was, 5 years. And he'd become, in his mind, so Americanized. But how come it took him so long? It took for his father to die, for his wife to come, and his child. All that time, I mean, obviously they were, you know, an arranged marriage. And I mean, we know at that time how things were, you know, in Russia, but among Jews. But he didn't send for her until after his father died, all those years.
Right.
And that I found puzzling.
Yeah, well, you know, on the one hand, he's maybe not that interested in bringing her and her son over. He wants to be, you know, he definitely wants to have his cake and eat it too, in a sense, right?
Yes.
You know, depending on who he's talking to, he says, oh, you should have a wife and a child. That's a great thing to have. And then, but he wants to chase around with whoever he wants to chase around with. You know, and in part, I think he thinks that that's what being an American is, right? That's how Americans behave. So there's some of that. I'm not sure how long he's been there. I thought it was 3 years, but I might be wrong. I remember for sure when he's talking to what is her name, Mamie?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's been there 7 years.
Right.
And he says to her that you speak like a regular Yankee. He says, I would think you was born here. So the broken English throughout the movie is wonderful, I think, you know, very evocative as well. You know, and there's just one interesting scene after another. I mean, the small, you know, sweatshops. I mean, we're not, right. This precedes like the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. The work was done in tenement apartments. Right. So there's a boss and 2 sewing machines in an apartment. Right. And the boss is in there talking about how he was a peddler and now he's the boss. And you were a Shiva Bucher, he says to Bernstein. And now you sit at the sewing machine for me. Right.
So Rabbi, here's some pictures from the Tenement Museum. When we take confirmation, we take them here. You can see really how small the rooms are, and it's claustrophobic. I've been, and it's one after another. And I would also say to Susan that, do we know the exact year of when Hester Street was supposed to have happened?
I think it opens on 1896.
Okay.
Does anyone remember? I'm pretty sure it says that.
I'd have to go look, but
yeah, Sue Berlowitz.
right. And that waiting to bring your family over.
Let's see. Sue, you unmuted? Great.
I just unmuted. It was 1896. Now, I got the feeling he would have never brought his wife over if it wasn't that his father died. He was having too good of time. And I think he did fall in love with Mamie. He fell in love with her Americanism.
Yeah.
Now, if you notice at the Get, he kept looking at Carol Kane because here suddenly she was an American.
Yeah.
She was a Yankee too, the way she looked, the way she was suddenly so attractive. She, at that point, was much more attractive than Mamie. But I think he was so committed to what he was doing that he just kept it going.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But she actually threw him out.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to think about, there's a few things at play here, right? And he also doesn't have the money, clearly, to bring her over. Now, it's because he's not putting his nickels together. Yeah. You know, right? He's spending everything he makes all the time. He can't bring her over until he borrows $25, right? Which later on Mamie says, "I've already said Kaddish for the $25 you borrowed." You know, there's some good lines like that
Right.
as well in the movie. You know, some choice sort of Yiddish sayings translated into English. Was with one tuchus you can't dance at two weddings, right?
Mhm.
Stuff like that. You know, charming their way. I
But,
also point out, by the way, that when he gets that letter from home, did you notice he has to bring it to somebody to read it to him?
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, Jake is no scholar. I mean, he doesn't know how to read. You know, it's not that he doesn't know how to read English. He didn't know how to read Yiddish. He gets a letter in Yiddish. He doesn't know how to read it. Okay? And that's not so unusual in that time period. You know, we do know, by the way, that there was a time when the library in the Lower East Side was open 24 hours a day. So it was the most densely populated place on earth, the most densely used library in the library system, because people worked all hours of the day of night, and then they came there to learn English. The Educational Alliance, a couple of blocks down the street on East Broadway, had classes to teach people English in the middle of the night. You know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, they were teaching English as a second language classes there. They're still teaching English as a second language there now. I don't think they're doing it in the middle of the night anymore, but they still have night classes. The students are mostly Chinese at this point. So,
Linda.
I have a question. I saw when they were going to be going on, like, I don't know, break, when the business was going slow, Jake was walking with his sewing machine to his apartment. Where did he get that sewing machine?
So
I know it came from the sweatshop, but did they used to give them to take it home with them?
No, I think just the opposite. He had to buy his own sewing machine.
So that's where his money went. Maybe
Yeah.
he was paying off the sewing machine.
Right, absolutely. You know, I mean, the cost of doing business. So he had to own his own sewing machine. So when he gets laid off for a period of time, you know, he takes it with him. You know,
And
maybe
Bernstein
he'll get a little
didn't have
work,
one.
maybe he'll get a little piecework doing something. But at any rate, it's his property. It goes with him where he goes.
And Bernstein didn't have one. The rumor did not have his
Yeah, he
own.
didn't have one. Okay, I didn't notice.
He didn't have it. Only
Right.
Jake was walking with one on his shoulder, and I wondered, where did this come from?
Yeah, so Bernstein has not put, you know, is not saving up the money. He doesn't own one yet, right? I think he hasn't been there quite as long as Jake too, right? So,
Marcia, and then Susan.
Yeah, I just want to say, and if you said this earlier, I apologize, but I thought some of the most poignant scenes was the bond that was it Bernstein, you know, the guy that was reading Torah all the time.
Yeah,
Was
Bernstein.
his bond with the little boy, with
Yeah,
Joey, and the way the mentor and student bonded together, and he was almost like the surrogate dad of this little guy, and
right.
you know, so I just, you know, love those parts. I thought they were very, very touching and very Jewish.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, it's a lovely little scene there where he's teaching him how to read, right?
Yeah.
And this is something his own father can't teach him.
Right.
You know, clearly. So we have some hope that Joey's going to do well, right? So he's going to learn and become that next generation of Jewish Americans. So I think it's lovely. I do want to.
Susan had,
You know, Jake had no respect for learning. Like he said to Gittel, so what? He only earned $6 a week. I earned $12 a week.
Right.
He really had no interest or respect. He was like a big child. But I do agree that the bond that Bernstein formed with the little boy was tremendous.
Yeah. And the chemistry between Gittel and Bernstein too. I mean, the scene where he's packing up, he's got to leave. now, right? And those lines very sort of, if someone were to ask a woman like that, well, a woman like that would say yes.
Yeah.
Right? So there's just such lovely things, and my Yiddish is not very good either, but you hear some words here and there and say, oh, I know that one, so very, very good, so
There was a lot of sei gesund, komm gesund, geh gesund,
Right.
which is a very, my in-laws always said that, and just
and
Yiddish
words like
phrase.
shadel and tickle, right, come up, so here and there are these words, right? The shadel is the wig that she wears, tells her she should take that off, and well, she's got a tickle, right? A little, a kerchief, so there's lots of details, right? So
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
Thank you. I saw Hester Street for the first time about 30 years ago or more, and I remember the expressions in Yiddish as opposed to in English. Do you know if there was a different version? Because I remember very well when he came home and she said to him, with ein Tachas, du kennst die tanzen auf den zwei Chasanas. And here she said it last night when we saw it, she said it in English.
Yeah.
With one Tuchash, you can't dance at two weddings. So I don't know where I could have possibly heard it other than in a different version of Hester Street.
Yeah.
You know whether there was one?
Well, clearly, to the best of my knowledge, no, and that they certainly didn't have the money to do that. So my guess is that your memory translated it back into the Yiddish. Now, I may be wrong, and you can look, feel free to prove me wrong, but when I was a kid, the first movie I saw was a black and white movie, and I remember it in color, right? Because I didn't know from black and white. I told my mother about it, about this woman in a green dress, and she said, "What green dress?" It was black and white, right? So
maybe so.
So our minds do some interesting things, and obviously your Yiddish is good enough. You can say the phrase, the phrase, so you may have translated the phrase in your own head. That's my guess, but
it could be right.
Yeah,
I thought I heard it in the movie.
Yeah, no, right. Well, that's it. We can't totally trust our memories, but that's lovely, actually. So we're getting close to the end already. I do want to talk about the art direction. The great story about the same horse in different colors. This is where she does a great job as a first-time director of making those street scenes look like the Lower East Side. Maybe the streets are a little too smooth, but other than that, using the same block over and over, right? And probably filming all of the street scenes at once, that right, movies are not shot sequentially. So you only have to do one day shooting outside, right? That's how you save money and crew and everything else. So, and of course, choosing to make the movie in black and white in 1975, it wasn't necessarily a cost factor, right? Although it was probably cheaper to shoot in black and white, even in 1975. Now it's more expensive to shoot in black and white than it would be. Although most films are not shot on film anymore anyway, so they're done digitally, so you can flip a switch and make it black and white or color if you like. But choosing to make it like there's a famous photographer of the Jewish Lower East Side, Jacob Rees, to make things look like that. That the last shot in the movie of the street, right, looks like a picture I've seen 1,000 times at the Tenement Museum, actually, in New York. So she has all of those things in mind as she's creating the art direction for this, and I think for someone who had not a lot of money, does an amazing job of making that look real, I think. There's a couple of hands up. Ed?
Sandy, and then Ed.
I don't know a lot of Yiddish, but if I had to find one Yiddish word to describe the whole movie and the story, it would be Hamish.
Yeah, small, small budget raised by friends, to make a movie, and they do. Yeah, Ed?
I'm making a comment for Judy, who said a lot of it reminded her of the early Charlie Chaplin things with the music and the pantomime and what have you.
Thank you. That's a great note. It's a great, I think very deliberately, the music in this movie is the music of the Nickelodeon, right? Is the music of the one reel silent movies, it's very different than the music that she does for Crossing Delancey, using a group of women singers at that time, the Roaches, who were actually had records out, right? I mean, 1975, she's deliberately looking back on those years, and that kind of sort of jaunty piano kind of thing with maybe just a touch of klezmer thrown in here and there, but just that sort of piano soundtrack is very evocative of the early days of the movies, and quite deliberate, I'm sure. So that's great. Yeah. So other thoughts? We're right up against the hour here.
And I have a lot of announcements.
Okay.
So next week, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz is streaming for free on YouTube. And I put the link in the chat. I'm going to go in chronological. That's on Tuesday. On Sunday, I guess I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. We have Danny Spungen, who's going to talk to us about Shanghai Landers. Are they commonly survivors? We're coming up on Kristallnacht, the remembrance of Kristallnacht. So that should be, I think they're all interesting, but he's really interesting. He's got a lot of artifacts. And then the evening, so next Tuesday, you could have two movie discussions.
Double feature. It's a
Pardon?
double feature. It's
A double feature
next
and
Tuesday.
plenty of time to get dinner. At 7 p.m., we're going to talk, well, not Rabbi is going to talk about A Serious Man. And it's streaming on Amazon Prime. You have to rent it for $3.99. So
Was that the announcements? So
I hope I got all of them.
okay, so just a last word. I mean, I really love this movie. I hope you guys liked it too. What's clearly some of it is stuck with some of you have seen it decades ago, right? There are just so many lines that are sort of beautiful. So many scenes. The scene with the peddler, we didn't get to talk about that at all.
Oh yeah.
If you wasn't gonna buy something, why'd you invite me in? Those kinds of things. When Mamie says to Jake, "What a short mind you've got." I mean, I think that's it's not good English, but it's really evocative of that's Jake, right? I mean, he's got a short mind. Whatever she means by that exactly, you can interpret your own way, but he doesn't plan the way you need to plan to get ahead. The scene in the park, where on the one hand where he's teaching his son about baseball, which is very nice, but the conversation with Bernstein and the idea that so she's been in America for a while, where are all the non-Jews? Right? On the Lower East Side, she's completely surrounded by Jewish community. What's all this thing about Americans, So it's really lovely. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking with you about a different story about about Jewish upward mobility, let's say, when we look at the Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.